Welcome to the 5th annual Tucson Festival of Books. I'm Jim Nintzel, the senior writer for the Tucson Weekly and host of AZ Illustrated Politics, airing each Friday night on PBS 6 here in Tucson. It's my great honor to be here today with Eric Laursen, author of The People's Pension, The Struggle to Defend Social Security Since Reagan. And through the use of television magic, we're also here with C-SPAN on Book TV, so hello from Tucson, Arizona, America. I'd like to also thank the City of Tucson for sponsoring this stage, and a big thanks to everyone who helps the Tucson Festival of Books come together. We'll be talking for about an hour here, and the first 40 minutes will be a Q&A with Mr. Laursen and myself, and then we'll go to questions from the audience, so hang on to your questions until then. And when we get wrapped up, Mr. Laursen will go to the Madden Media Tent B that is located south and west of the Student Union, so he can meet you and autograph copies of his book. And of course, if you could turn off your cell phones now, that would be great. So let's get introductions out of the way here. Eric Laursen is an independent financial and political journalist, activist, and commentator. In addition to writing The People's Pension, he's co-written the Understand the Crash, and has written for a wide variety of publications, including The Nation, The Village Voice, and The Huffington Post. So please welcome Eric Laursen to the Festival of Books.
And very glad to be here again.
Let's start with the question raised by the title of our session here, and that is Social Security a manufactured crisis?
The short answer is yes. There is no existential crisis that Social Security faces in the sense that it will not exist in X number of years if something drastic isn't done. But there's two crises that we talk about when we talk about a Social Security crisis. Number one is a fiscal crisis. Will it have enough income and revenues from whatever sources to support itself in future years? And the second crisis is a political crisis. And I define that as a crisis in terms of whether for lack of a better term, the governing class in this country wants to support Social Security anymore, and the degree to which there is sufficient popular support, mobilized popular support for it that it has to continue. So I'll address the fiscal crisis first because that's the one that's in the media all the time. To define this a little more closely, Social Security depends on two sources of income. It depends on payroll taxes, and then it depends on interest income on the trust fund that it builds up. And I can go into that in a little more detail, but I'm not sure you'd want me to. But the point is that the current projections by the Social Security Administration and the Congressional Budget Office, and this is what you see in the media all the time, is that in 2033, that's the latest estimate they have, Social Security will run out of money in the trust fund. That means all it will have to pay benefits is the current payroll tax revenue coming in. And what that means, if their projections are correct, and remember these are only projections, is that Social Security would only have enough money to pay 75% of benefits in 2033. Now, what that means is that Congress would have to do something to balance the books, because Social Security is not legally able to draw from other sources. It has to use the income that it gets from those two sources that I mentioned. Congress would have to cut benefits to match the money coming in, or it would have to raise payroll taxes or figure out some other source of income to add in to make up the difference. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about a fiscal crisis. Now, a few things to keep in mind here to put this in context. First of all, some of you may have heard me explain some of this yesterday morning at the panel I was on, so I hope I'm not repeating myself too much, is that Social Security what the Congress could do is it could raise the cap on income subject to payroll tax. This is raise the cap as an idea that some of you may have heard. What that really means is currently only the first $113,000 of a person's income is subject to payroll tax. Okay, what we could do is raise that cap to, let's say, $200,000 or $250,000, or even, this is an idea that Senator Bernie Sanders, for example, has put out, we could have a donut hole and tax and only subject income over $250,000 to payroll tax. There's a number of ways to do this, but the point is that people who are making that kind of money, more of their income should be exposed to payroll tax. Okay, that's one. That would, by some estimates, if the cap was completely eliminated, that would eliminate the problem altogether for the year 2033. We'd have 75 years at least of healthy Social Security. If it was simply cut, if it was simply raised to, let's say, $250,000, we could eliminate close to half of the shortfall. There's other things that could be done too. One idea that's come forward is to raise the estate tax back to where it was and devote that revenue to Social Security. Another idea that's come up is simply to raise the payroll tax across the board a little bit, gradually over 20 years. It could be done slowly enough so it wouldn't affect anybody's purchasing power, and that would do the trick. We'd be talking about $1.50 a week or something like that. The key point here, though, and this gets into the political crisis problem, is there's three solutions to Social Security that are being discussed all the time in Washington by the sort of the economic and political elite, I guess you would say, what Paul Krugman calls the very serious people. I call these solutions the three-headed monster. One of them is to raise the retirement age, which would effectively be a cut in benefits, especially for people who live a very long lifespan. Number two is to means test Social Security, which is essentially reduce or eliminate benefits for upper income people. Now, there's two problems with that. First of all, you would have to means test down to a pretty low level, by some estimates to the point of cutting benefits for people whose lifetime, or let's say their highest income in their working years was about $60,000. Okay, those aren't exactly affluent people. Also, you wouldn't really be able to raise that much money. The other thing is that would undermine Social Security's, which I think is the most important element of Social Security, which is the social solidarity aspect. The fact that people of all income levels get something from it, participate in it, and therefore feel a sense of loyalty or ownership over it. It would undermine that. And the third idea that they come up with that's repeated over and over again in the national media is the chained CPI, which essentially, and to be quick and dirty about it, it means it means adjusting the formula that's used to compute benefits so that they would go down. Now, that's sold as a sort of a technical correction, but it would actually be a pretty serious change. It would start to affect people pretty materially within the next decade, and more after that. Now, the common denominator of these three ideas for fixing Social Security is that they would, all of them, strangely enough, would exempt the most affluent people. They would see a little bit of reduction in their benefits, but that's not a big deal to them. If they live longer, they would see a reduction in benefits, but they've got plenty of other money. It really would be a very, very small hit to them. Now, if the cap was raised, it was one of the more progressive ideas, if the cap was raised, that would actually be a fairly significant cut in their annual income. So what we have is a political crisis, number one. It's a crisis in terms of what adjustments do we make. Social Security is not, again, threatened in any existential way. The question is, which way do we go in terms of fixing these problems, if we even need to fix them? There's an argument to be made that maybe we should wait until we're closer to the time when theoretically these projections would start to take hold. But if we're going to put that aside for a second, the question is, do we want to do this in a progressive way or a non-progressive way? And the problem is there's a bit of a disconnect between the public and the sort of, as I loosely call them, the governing class, economic and political governing class. Consistently, in polls, the public supports raising the cap, raising payroll taxes modestly across the board, or some solution like that if it would preserve Social Security, because people value Social Security. In Washington, that's not the case. In Washington, it's more a question of which constituency are we harming, and what's going to happen to our ability to raise funds for ourselves. So I think that explains the dynamic.
Okay. And how important is Social Security to the economic security of